Welcome to Midnight Whispers, the place where the edge of the map meets the edge of reason. Tonight we slip into Alaska, a frozen land where even the daylight feels haunted and the aurora sways like restless spirits. Out here, the roads vanish, cabins rot under snow, and whispers crawl through the pines. These are real stories, drawn from the people who've lived here long enough to know what moves in the dark. Before we start, hit subscribe and tap the bell so the next time the cold calls, you're ready. The night's already settling in, and the first story waits like a shadow at the tree line. Step closer, but not too close. Story 1. Ice road trucker. As hitchhiker, I want you to think about the last time you picked up a hitchhiker. Most of you probably never have. Your parents warned you, the news scared you, and common sense told you it was a bad idea. But on the Dalton Highway in Alaska, the rules are different. Up there, stopping for someone on the side of the road is not just courtesy. It is survival. Because if you break down in that frozen hell, you are going to pray someone stops for you too. I drove ice road runs for 11 years. Hauling supplies to the oil fields in Dead Horse, 500 miles of the loneliest, most brutal highway in North America. Temperatures that drop to 60 below. Whiteouts that erase the road entirely. And stretches where you will not see another human being for 100 miles. You learn to respect the road. You learn to trust your gut. And you learn that some of the stories the old-timers tell are not just stories. They warn you about the hitchhiker your first week on the job. Every trucking company up there has a version of the tale. A man in modern winter gear standing on the roadside in the middle of nowhere. He flags you down, says his car broke down a few miles back. Needs a ride to the next camp or town. Seems normal enough, grateful, cold but not hypothermic. The kind of guy you would have a beer with at a truck stop. But then he starts talking. Mentions things that do not add up. References events from decades ago like they happened yesterday. And then, while your truck is doing 60 miles an hour down a sheet of ice, he vanishes. Just gone, leaving nothing but a wet spot on your passenger seat and the smell of diesel and old snow. I never believed it. Figured it was just something to scare rookies. A campfire story to pass the time in the long dark. Until last January, when I picked him up myself. It was my second run of the month. I had left Fairbanks at 4 a.m, loaded down with drilling equipment and supplies. The sky was still black. It would stay black for most of the day. That far north in winter, you get maybe 3 hours of twilight before the darkness swallows everything again. The temperature readout on my dash said 41 below zero. The road was a ribbon of ice cutting through an endless white void. I was about 200 miles north of Fairbanks when I saw him. A figure standing on the shoulder, arm raised. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light. A shadow cast by my headlights. But as I got closer, I could see he was real. A man in a heavy parka and insulated pants. Good gear, the kind you buy at REI, not some gas station. He waved both arms over his head in the universal sign for help. I should mention something about stopping on the Dalton. You do not do it unless you absolutely have to. Every second you are stationary in that cold, your truck is at risk. Fuel can gel, brake lines can freeze. If your engine dies, you might not get it started again. But leaving someone out there is a death sentence. So I hit the air brakes and felt the whole rig shudder as it slowed on the ice. He ran up to the passenger side as soon as I stopped. I could see his breath coming out in great clouds of vapor. His face was hidden by a fur-lined hood, but his body language screamed relief. I unlocked the door and he climbed up into the cab, bringing a blast of cold air that made my eyes water. Thank you so much. He said it while pulling the door shut and stripping off his gloves. His voice was steady, not panicked, not even particularly stressed, just tired and cold. I waited for him to say more, but he just sat there blowing on his hands and looking out the windshield. I put the truck back in gear and eased us forward. The weight of the load meant I had to be gentle with the acceleration. One wrong move and we would jackknife. What happened? I asked after a minute of silence. Car trouble. Alternator went out about 10 miles back. I tried to make it to the next camp, but the battery died. No heat, no lights. Had to walk. That made sense. It happened all the time. People underestimated the road and overestimated their vehicles. But something about his answer felt off. The Dalton is not a place where you just drive a regular car, especially in winter. You need a truck, a good one, with winter tires and emergency gear. This guy had professional cold weather clothing. He should have known better. What kind of car? I asked. Ford Taurus. Blue. A Taurus. On the Dalton Highway. In January. That was insane. That was suicidal. You drove a Taurus up here. He nodded. Seemed like a good idea at the time. Got a good deal on it back in Anchorage. Needed to get north for work. I let it go. People do stupid things. I had seen enough breakdowns and accidents to know that common sense goes out the window when you are desperate or broke or both. I focused on the road. The snow was starting to come down harder. Not a full whiteout yet, but enough to cut visibility. My headlights carved a weak tunnel through the falling white. We drove in silence for maybe 20 minutes. He sat perfectly still, hands folded in his lap, staring straight ahead. I kept stealing glances at him. There was something strange about the way he held himself. Too calm, too comfortable, like he had done this 1,000 times before. Finally, he spoke again. You ever drive this road in summer? Once or twice, I said. Easier without the ice. Longer daylight. Why? Just thinking about the last time I was up here. Beautiful country in the summer. Green everywhere. Saw a grizzly and her cubs right off the road near Coldfoot. Must have been 80 degrees that day. Felt like a different planet. 80 degrees. I had never seen it get that warm on the Dalton. Maybe 70 on a good day, but 80. That seemed unlikely. Still, I did not argue. Maybe he was misremembering. Maybe he was still rattled from being stranded. When was that? I asked. Summer of '92. July, I think. Definitely July because I remember thinking about how close it was to the 4th. Fireworks and all that. Weird to think about fireworks when the sun does not even set. 92. 31 years ago. I looked at him again. He was maybe 40, 45 at most, which would have made him a kid in '92. 10 years old, maybe younger. But he talked about it like he had been driving, like he had been an adult. You were up here as a kid. I asked carefully. He did not answer right away. Just kept staring out the windshield. The snow was heavier now. My wipers were working overtime and still barely keeping up. I had to slow down. 15 miles an hour. 10. Any faster and I risked sliding off into the ditch. Not a kid, he said finally. I was working the pipeline. Maintenance crew. Long shifts. Hard work. Good money, though. Saved up enough to buy a house when I got back to Fairbanks. Little place on the outskirts. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. The pipeline work in '92. That would make him at least 50 now, probably older. But the man sitting next to me was not 50. His hands were smooth, no age spots, no weathering. When he pushed back his hood, I saw dark hair without a trace of gray. How old are you? I asked, tried to keep my voice casual, just making conversation. He turned to look at me for the first time since getting in the truck. His eyes were pale blue, almost colorless, and they were looking at me like I had asked him something profound. Something that required real thought. How old do you think I am? I do not know. 40, give or take. He smiled. It was not a warm smile. Does it matter? The temperature in the cab felt like it had dropped 10 degrees. My breath was fogging now, even with the heater running full blast. I could see frost forming on the inside of the passenger window. Right next to where he sat. You said you worked the pipeline in '92. I said, that would make you older than 40. Did I say that? He tilted his head. Funny how memory works. Sometimes things get mixed up. Times and places. You ever have that happen? Remember something clear as day, but then realize it could not have been you. Must have been someone else. Must have been a different time. I wanted to pull over. Wanted to tell him to get out. But we were doing 10 miles an hour in near whiteout conditions with a full load. Stopping was not an option. I just had to keep driving and hope we reached Coldfoot soon. The camp there would have people. Safety. Normal reality. The radio crackled. I nearly jumped out of my skin. It was the emergency channel. A voice cutting through static. Any units north of Fairbanks be advised. High wind warning in effect. Visibility near zero. Road conditions deteriorating. Recommend holding position until conditions improve. I grabbed the mic. This is Unit 73 northbound approaching mile marker 230. Conditions confirmed. Will proceed with caution. The voice acknowledged and signed off. When I looked back at my passenger, he was smiling again. You should have stopped, he said. Back when I flagged you down. You should have kept driving. What? The road does not like to be cheated. It takes what it is owed. One way or another. The heater was blowing ice cold air now. I could see my breath in thick clouds. The windows were completely frosted over. I had to use my sleeve to wipe a clear spot on the windshield. Outside, the world was nothing but white. No road, no markers, just white. Who are you? I asked. My voice cracked. He leaned back in his seat. Relaxed, comfortable, like he was settling in for a long trip. I am the one who did not make it. I am the guy who thought a Taurus would be fine. Who thought he could save a few bucks on a proper vehicle. Who thought he knew better than the old-timers and their warnings. I am what happens when the cold gets into your bones and does not let go. I tried to look at him directly, but my eyes would not focus. He was there, but also not there. Solid but translucent. Real but impossible. In 93. He continued, January 14th. I broke down right where you picked me up. Same spot. Funny how that works. Walked north looking for help. Made it about a mile before the cold got too deep. Sat down to rest. Just for a minute. Just to catch my breath. They found me in April when the snow melted. Still sitting. Still waiting. The white outside suddenly cleared. Just for a second. Long enough for me to see something on the side of the road. A shape. A figure. Sitting in the snow. Covered in frost. Then the white closed back in and it was gone. When I turned back to the passenger seat, it was empty. The door was still locked. The window still frosted. But he was gone. The only evidence he had ever been there was a wet spot on the fabric. Melted frost. And the temperature in the cab slowly starting to rise. I drove for another 3 hours before I reached Coldfoot. Did not stop. Did not slow down. Just kept moving. When I finally parked at the camp, I sat in the cab for 20 minutes with the engine running, trying to convince myself I had imagined it. Heat exhaustion from too many hours on the road. Hypoxia from the thin cold air. Anything but what I knew it was. But when I checked the GPS log later, I saw it. The exact spot where I stopped. Mile marker 212. I looked it up, searched old accident reports, missing persons, news archives from 30 years ago. And I found him. David Martinez, 43 years old. Disappeared January 14th, 1993. Body recovered April 9th. Cause of death, hypothermia. Vehicle, a blue Ford Taurus, found abandoned on the Dalton Highway. I quit long-haul ice road work after that. Took a job doing local deliveries in Fairbanks. Steady hours, no overnight runs, no empty highways. People ask me why I gave up the good money. I tell them I got too old for it. That the cold was getting into my joints. That I wanted to be closer to family. But the real reason is simpler. I know now that the road keeps what it takes. That some debts do not get forgiven just because time passes. And I know that if you stop for the man in the modern parka on mile marker 212, he will get in your truck. He will thank you. He will make small talk. And then he will remind you that some people never made it home. That their last moments were filled with cold and dark and the terrible realization that help was not coming. He is still out there. Still flagging down trucks. Still climbing into warm cabs and telling his story. And the worst part is not that he vanishes. It is what he leaves behind. That wet spot on the seat. That smell of diesel and old snow. And the knowledge that you stopped where he died. That for just a few minutes, you shared your space with something that should not exist. The other drivers still talk about him. The hitchhiker. The ghost of the Dalton. They laugh about it over coffee. They tell new guys it is just a story. Just a legend. But I have seen the look in their eyes. The ones who have picked him up. We recognize each other now. We know what rides in that passenger seat when you make the mistake of stopping. We know that some roads do not forgive. And we know that the cold up there is hungry. Always hungry. And it never stops feeding. Story 2. I flew into the wilderness with a stranger, and I barely made it out alive. I need to tell you something that happened to me in Alaska. Something I tried to forget for almost 30 years. But the nightmares won. He stopped. And maybe if I say it out loud, if someone else knows the full truth, I can finally sleep through the night without waking up in a cold sweat, hearing the sound of snow crunching under boots that Aaron to mine. It was February of 1983, and I was 24 years old, working as a dancer in Anchorage. Not the kind of dancing you see on Broadway, the kind that pays rent when you got nowhere else to go and a drug habit that won to quit. I'm not proud of it, but survival doesn't care about pride. The city was brutal that winter, colder than anything I experienced growing up in Texas. Negative 30 degrees some nights, the kind of cold that makes your lungs burn when you breathe. One evening, a man came into the club. He was short, maybe 5'7", with a stutter that made him seem harmless, almost childlike. Thick glasses, thinning hair, a wedding ring on his finger. He looked like someone whose dad, like a guy who can help you change a tire or lend you jumper cables without asking for anything in return. He said his name was Bob, and he wanted company. Not at the club, somewhere private. He offered me $300, which was more money than I see in a week of dancing. I should have said no. Every instinct I developed living on the streets, every warning bell that had kept me alive this long, told me to walk away. But $300 meant I could eat real food for a month. It meant I could get enough product to keep the shakes away. So I got in his car, a brown station wagon that smelled like motor oil and something else. Something metallic I couldn't quite place. Bob drove us to his house on the outskirts of town, a modest place with a workshop attached to the garage. He was polite the whole way, asking about where I was from, if I liked Alaska, stammering through his words like a nervous teenager. The house was neat inside, almost obsessively clean, with photos of his wife and kids on the mantle. It made me feel safer somehow, seeing those family pictures. Monsters done. They have families, right? They don't kiss their kids goodnight or remember anniversaries. We went to the basement. He poured me a drink, something strong that burned going down. We talked for maybe 20 minutes. Him sitting in an old recliner, me on a worn couch that smelled like cigarettes. Then he asked if I wanted to see his plane. He was a licensed pilot, he said, had a small aircraft he used for hunting trips. He seemed excited about it, like a kid showing off a new toy. That's when everything changed. The moment I stood up, the room started spinning. Not the pleasant buzz of alcohol, but something darker, heavier, pulling me down like gravity had doubled. My legs felt like they were filled with sand. Bob's face shifted then, the shy smile dropping away like a mask someone had grown tired of wearing. His eyes behind those thick glasses weren't too friendly anymore. They were calculating, cold, the eyes of something that had been waiting patiently for exactly this moment. I tried to run. My body wouldn't cooperate. He was on me before I could reach the stairs, stronger than his small frame suggested possible. He had rope in his hands, already prepared, already looped into knots that spoke of practice and planning. I fought, but the drug in my system made my movements slow and clumsy. Within minutes, I was bound, wrists behind my back, ankles tied together. He didn't say anything while he worked. He just hummed, some tune I didn't recognize, casual and content like he was working on a crossword puzzle. Then he raped me, right there in his basement, with his family, his photos watching from upstairs. I want to describe it beyond that. Some things don't need detail. Some things should stay buried. Afterward, he stood up, adjusted his glasses, and told me we were going flying. His stutter was completely gone now. His voice was calm, methodical, like he was discussing the weather or explaining how to change oil in a car. He said he had a special place he wanted to show me, somewhere out in the wilderness where the snow never melted and the silence was so complete you could hear your own heartbeat. He said other girls had been there before me. He said they liked it so much they decided to stay. The way he said it made my blood freeze colder than the Alaskan winter outside. He wasn't planning to bring me back. He loaded me into his car, still bound, and drove to Merrill Field, a small airport on the edge of Anchorage. It was past midnight, and the airport was deserted, just rows of small planes sleeping under covers of snow and ice. His plane was a Piper Super Cub, a small single-engine aircraft with skis instead of wheels for landing on snow. He'd done this before. I could tell by how smoothly he moved, how he parked where there were no lights, no cameras, no witnesses. He untied my ankles so I could walk but kept my wrist bound behind my back. He had a gun now, a rifle slung over his shoulder, and he pressed something sharp against my ribs as we walked to the plane. A hunting knife. He told me if I screamed, he'd gut me right there on the tarmac and leave me for the morning crew to find. I believed him. Everything about this man radiated a quiet, terrifying competence. Inside the plane, he tied me to the passenger seat with more rope. The cabin was tiny, barely enough room for 2 people, and it smelled like old leather and aviation fuel. He started the engine, and we lifted off into the darkness, climbing into a sky so black and vast it felt like we were leaving the world entirely. For maybe 45 minutes, we flew north. I couldn't see much through the windows, just endless darkness punctuated occasionally by the dim outline of mountains or the frozen white expanse of a river. Bob didn't talk. He just flew, occasionally checking gauges or adjusting controls, completely at ease. This was his element. Up here in the darkness, flying toward nowhere. He was a god and I was nothing. Then something happened that saved my life, though I didn't know it at the time. The plane hit turbulence, bad turbulence that rattled the entire cabin and made the wings shudder like they might tear off. Bob swore, both hands fighting the controls, and for just a second, his attention was completely on keeping us airborne. I'd been working on the ropes around my wrists the entire flight, rubbing them against a rough edge of the seat frame behind me. My hands were slick with blood from the friction, but I felt the rope starting to give. When the turbulence hit, when Bob was distracted, I pulled with everything I had. The rope snapped. My hands were free. I didn't think. Thinking would have paralyzed me with fear. I just acted. I reached across the cabin and grabbed the yoke, the plane, his control stick, and yanked it hard to the left. The plane immediately banked violently, and Bob screamed, a sound of pure rage and surprise. He grabbed my arm, trying to pull me away, but I held on, pulling the yoke in random directions, making the plane buck and spin. We were going to crash. I knew that, but crashing was better than wherever he was taking me. Crashing was a chance. The wilderness, wherever he had in mind, was certain death. Bob hit me hard, his fist connecting with my jaw, but I didn't let go. The plane was in a spin now, losing altitude fast, the engine screaming. Through the window, I could see the ground rushing up, white and endless and deadly. Bob stopped fighting me and grabbed the controls with both hands, trying to pull us out of the dive. He was good, even with me fighting him, even with the plane spiraling toward the earth. He almost recovered. Almost. We hit hard, the skis making contact with deep snow on the side of a mountain. The impact threw me forward against my seatbelt, and I heard something in my chest crack. The plane skidded, spinning, one wing catching on something and tearing away with a sound like the world ending. Then we stopped, tilted at a sharp angle, the cabin filled with smoke and the smell of burning fuel. I was alive. Everything hurt, but I was alive. Bob wasn't moving. His head had hit the dashboard during the crash, and blood was running down his face, pooling in his lap. I didn't check if he was dead. I didn't care. I just needed to get out before the plane caught fire. He woke up. I crawled through the shattered windscreen, dropping into snow that came up to my waist. It was still dark, maybe 3 or 4 in the morning, and the temperature had to be 20 or 30 below zero. I was wearing jeans and a thin jacket, nothing that would keep me alive out here for long. But I ran anyway, stumbling through the snow, putting distance between myself and the plane. Behind me, I heard a sound that made my heart stop. Movement, groaning. Bob was alive. I ran harder, my lungs burning in the frozen air, my broken ribs screaming with every breath. The snow was so deep it was like running in a nightmare where your legs want to move fast enough. I could hear him behind me, crashing through the snow, shouting my name between curses and threats. He still had the knife, maybe the gun too, and I was leaving a trail a blind person could follow. I don't know how long I ran. Time lost meaning in that darkness. I fell countless times, pushed myself up, kept going. My hands and feet went numb. My face felt like it was being peeled away by the cold. But I kept running because stopping meant dying, and I hadn't survived this long just to freeze to death on a mountain. Then I saw lights, faint, distant, but definitely lights. A cabin or a ranger station, something human, something that meant safety. I aimed for it, using the last reserves of energy I didn't I had. The lights got closer, and finally I could see it was a small lodge, dark except for a single window glowing orange. I reached the door and pounded on it, screaming for help. The door opened, and a man stood there, middle-aged, wearing a flannel robe, looking at me like I was a ghost. I collapsed into his arms, and the last thing I remember before passing out was telling him there was a monster in the woods, and he was coming for me. I woke up in a hospital in Anchorage 2 days later. Frostbite had taken 3 of my toes. My ribs were broken. I had a concussion and severe hypothermia. But I was alive. The police came to interview me while I was still in the hospital. They were skeptical at first. I was a prostitute with a drug problem, not exactly a reliable witness. But I told them everything. The house with the basement, the plane, the crash, the man named Bob who tried to kill me. They found the plane a week later, right where I said it would be. Bob was gone, walked out of the wilderness like nothing had happened, but the plane was registered to a man named Robert Hansen. A baker, a family man, a respected member of the community. The police brought him in for questioning. He denied everything at first, said I was making it up, that I'd never been in his plane, never been to his house. But they searched his home anyway, and that's when they found the trophies. Jewelry that didn't belong to his wife. Identification cards from women who had been reported missing. And in his workshop, A map with dozens of little crosses marked in red ink, scattered across the wilderness of Alaska. Each cross was a grave. Robert Hansen had been hunting women for over a decade. He'd pick up prostitutes and dancers. Women's society wouldn't. He'd miss women no one would believe. He'd take them to his home, assault them, then fly them into the wilderness. Once there, he'd let them run while he hunted them with a rifle, like they were animals. The ones he caught, he'd kill and bury in shallow graves in the frozen ground. The ones he didn't catch died anyway from the cold and exposure. Either way, they disappeared, swallowed by the Alaskan wilderness like they never existed at all. The crosses on his map led police to 17 bodies, 17 women who vanished into the snow. But there were more crosses than bodies. Some graves were empty. Some women were never found. The ground in Alaska is frozen solid most of the year. Digging is nearly impossible. How many others are still out there, buried in places only Bob knows, waiting in the ice for someone to find them? They called him the Butcher Baker. The press loved that, the irony of a man who made bread by day and murdered by night. He was sentenced to 461 years in prison plus life without parole. He died in 2014, in a prison in Pennsylvania, still refusing to tell authorities where all the bodies were buried. I testified at his trial, faced him across a courtroom and told my story while he sat there, expressionless, like I was describing something that had happened to someone else. His wife left him. His children changed their names. But none of that brings back the women who didn't make it. None of that gives them the chance I got. I think about them sometimes. The ones still out there in the snow. I think about how they must have run, just like I did, through the darkness and cold, knowing a monster was behind them. I think about their last moments, whether they were terrified or whether the cold made them sleepy, made it easy. I crashed the plane. I ran through the wilderness. I survived because of luck and desperation and maybe something watching over me that night. But I could just as easily be one of those crosses on his map, one of those nameless bodies in the frozen ground. Sometimes I wonder if the nightmare ended that night, or if it is still going. Because here, it's what keeps me awake, what makes me check my locks 3 times before bed, what makes me jump at sudden movements in the dark. When the police searched Bob's house, they found journals, detailed records of his kills, dates and descriptions and locations. But the entries stopped in 1982, a full year before he grabbed me. For that entire year, there were no recorded kills, no new crosses on his map. The police thought maybe he stopped, taken a break, tried to control his urges. But I read those journals, seen the handwriting, the obsessive detail. Men like Bob Don, they stop. They don, they take breaks. They escalate, which means one of two things. Either he got smarter about hiding the bodies, found places even more remote than the ones police discovered. Or he had help, someone else who knew, who flew him, who covered his tracks. 2 years ago, I got a letter at my home in Texas. No return address. Inside was a single piece of paper with a map of Alaska printed on it. And on that map, in red ink, was a cross. Just one, in a location the police never searched, a place that wasn't on Bob's original map. Under the cross, someone had written 2 words in careful, printed letters. Still hunting. Bob died in 2014. I checked. He's definitely dead. I went to Pennsylvania, stood outside the prison where he took his last breath, needed to be sure. But someone sent me that map. Someone knows where at least one more body is buried. Someone who was never caught. I haven't gone to the police. What would I tell them? That I got an anonymous letter years after Bob's death? They think I was paranoid, damaged by what happened to me. And maybe I am. Maybe the letter was just someone's sick idea of a joke. A true crime obsessive playing games. But late at night, when I am alone and the house is quiet, I think about that map. I think about that single red cross marking a grave in the snow. And I wonder if somewhere out there, someone is still flying into the wilderness with a woman who doesn't, she is about to run for her life. I wonder if the Butcher Baker was ever really alone. Story 3. Claim at mile 42, the prospector. This journal I found on the Stampede Trail ended mid-sentence. And the last entry was dated 3 days ago. My name is Cole Mitchell, and I am a wilderness photographer from Bozeman, Montana. Last September, I hiked the Stampede Trail in Alaska, following the route that made headlines when Chris McCandless died out there in 1992. Everyone knows about the bus. about into the wild. But nobody talks about what else walks that trail. What was there long before McCandless? What? Still there now? I started at the trailhead on September 15th. The plan was simple. Spend 5 days photographing the landscape, document the famous bus, then hike back out. I had proper gear, satellite phone, bear spray, and enough experience to know the Alaska wilderness does not forgive mistakes. I thought I was prepared. I was catastrophically wrong. The first day was uneventful. The trail follows an old mining road, overgrown but still visible. Birch and spruce crowding in from both sides. The Teklanika River flowing somewhere off to my right. Beautiful country. Empty country. I saw no one. Expected to see no one. The Stampede Trail is not a popular destination outside of McCandless pilgrims, and by mid-September, even those have usually gone home. I made camp around mile 20, set up my tent in a clearing 30 yards off the trail. As I was filtering water from a stream, I noticed something carved into a birch tree. Old carving, weathered, the letters barely visible. It read, "His claim mile 42, turn back." I photographed it. Figured it was some old mining era warning. The Stampede Trail area was crawling with prospectors in the 1920s and 30s. They were territorial, violent sometimes. The carving was probably just a property marker from that era. Nothing sinister. But as I ate dinner, I kept thinking about it, about the phrasing, not my claim or private property. His claim, third person, like someone else had carved it. Someone warning people about another person, whose territory. And the turn back part. That felt urgent, desperate even. I slept poorly, kept hearing sounds outside my tent. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, circling my campsite. I told myself it was animals, moose or caribou, but the footsteps were too measured, too purposeful. Around 3 a.m., they stopped directly outside my tent. I could hear breathing, raspy, labored, like someone with damaged lungs. I waited, barely breathing myself. After maybe 5 minutes, the footsteps moved away, back toward the trail. I heard them fade into distance. When dawn came, I checked for tracks. Found boot prints, old style, narrow, like the kind worn in the early 1900s. They circled my camp 3 times, then headed north on the trail. Toward mile 42, I should have turned back then. Should have recognized the warning. But I was a photographer. I saw an opportunity for a unique story. Old mining legends, ghost stories, something beyond the typical McCandless narrative. So I packed up and continued north. Following those boot prints, I found the second carving at mile 30. Different tree, same message. His claim mile 42, turn back. And beneath it, something new. A date, 1934, and 3 words carved smaller, almost hidden. He still watches. The boot prints continued. I followed them for 6 more miles. They never left the trail, never deviated, just straight north, consistent stride. Someone walking with purpose, walking toward something. Around noon, I reached mile 42. The trail opened into a wider area. An old mining camp, several collapsed structures, rusted equipment, the remains of a sluice box. And in the center of the camp, untouched by time or weather, was a cabin. Small, maybe 12 by 12 feet, but intact, the roof solid, the door closed, and the windows covered from inside. The boot prints led straight to the cabin door, then stopped. I approached carefully, called out. No response. The cabin had no lock, just a wooden latch. I lifted it. The door swung inward with a long creak. The interior was frozen in time. A cot with a sleeping bag, a table with tin plates, a small stove, shelves with canned goods, everything covered in dust but otherwise preserved, like someone had just stepped out and never returned. But the dates on the canned goods were from the 1930s. 90 years of dust lay over everything, except the journal on the table. That was clean, no dust, like it had been placed there recently. I opened it. The pages were filled with handwriting. Tight, obsessive, entries dated sporadically over decades. The first was from March 1934. The last was from 3 days ago, September 12, 2024. I read the early entries first. They belonged to a prospector named Thomas Harding. He had filed a claim at this location in 1933. Found color in the creek, small amounts of gold, enough to keep him coming back season after season. But the entries quickly became disturbed, paranoid. Harding wrote about feeling watched, about seeing someone at the tree line, always at dusk, always standing perfectly still, a figure in old prospector, his clothes. Harding thought it was another miner, a rival. He confronted the figure several times. It never responded, never moved, just watched. By the summer of 1934, Harding was convinced the figure was not human. It appeared every evening, same spot, same posture, but it never left tracks. Never moved when Harding looked away and back. It was just suddenly in a different location. Closer. Always closer. The final entry from Harding was dated September 20th, 1934. He wrote that the figure was at his door. Standing outside, he could see its shadow through the window covering. Could hear it breathing. That same raspy, labored breathing. Harding wrote that he understood now. This was not his claim. Had never been his claim. The land belonged to something else. Something that had been here long before prospectors. Something that guarded its territory. The entry ended. I will join it now. No choice. It demands. The next entry was dated June 1967. Different handwriting. A hiker named Robert Chen. He had found the cabin. Found Harding. Its remains in the woods 50 yards from the door. Just bones and scraps of clothing. Chen wrote about the strange feeling of being watched. About a figure at the tree line. About boot prints that appeared in the mud overnight. Prints that matched the boots on Harding, as skeleton. Chen, his final entry was 3 days later. Same story. The figure getting closer. The breathing outside the cabin. The realization that leaving was not an option. The land did not let people leave. The entry ended mid-sentence. It is at the door now. I can see it through the crack. It looks like me. My face. My clothes. It is wearing. I flipped through more entries. 1983, 1995, 2008, 2019. Different people. Different handwriting. Same story. Each one finding the cabin. Each one experiencing the watcher. Each one adding to the journal before disappearing. Some entries were coherent. Others descended into madness. But all ended the same way. Incomplete. Cut off. Abandoned mid-thought. The most recent entry was dated September 12th. 3 days ago. The handwriting was shaky. Desperate. It described the watcher taking the writer's appearance. Wearing it like a costume. Walking the trail in his form. Leading other hikers here. The entry said, if you are reading this, you were led here by me. Except it was not me. It was the thing wearing my face. I'm sorry. There is no escape now. The claim demands payment. You will write in this journal. You will see the watcher. You will become the watcher. That is how it grows. That is how it feeds. I dropped the journal, back toward the door. Outside, the sun was setting. The tree line was maybe 100 yards away. And standing at the edge, perfectly still, was a figure. Wearing my clothes, my jacket, my hat, standing with my posture, my stance. It was me, watching myself. I ran, grabbed my pack and ran south on the trail. Back toward the trailhead, 22 miles. I could make it if I ran through the night. The figure did not follow, did not chase. It just watched as I fled. I ran for 2 hours, until my lungs burned and my legs shook. Then I made a critical mistake. I looked back. The trail behind me was empty. Just darkness and trees. No figure. No pursuit. Relief washed over me. I slowed to a walk. Tried to catch my breath. It's when I saw it ahead of me. Standing in the trail. Blocking my path south. The figure wearing my face. It had not chased me. It had simply appeared ahead of me. Waiting. I turned and ran north. Back toward the cabin. The only direction it would let me go. I am writing this from inside the cabin. The figure is outside. I can see its shadow through the window covering. Can hear that raspy breathing. My breathing. My shadow. I tried the satellite phone. No signal. The device works but cannot connect. Like something is blocking transmission. I understand now. Harding understood. Chen understood. All the others understood. This is not a haunting. This is a trap. The land itself is alive. Conscious. It lures people here. Takes their form. Sends their duplicate back down the trail to lead others north. Each person adding to its collection. Each person becoming another watcher. I can feel it already. The pull, the compulsion to open the door, to join the figure outside, to become part of whatever waits in these woods. The journal says there is no escape, that everyone who comes here stays, becomes another guardian of the claim, another warning that nobody heeds. If you are reading this, you were led here by something wearing someone else's face. Maybe mine. Maybe another hiker is. It does not matter. You are here now. You are part of the claim. You will see yourself at the tree line. You will hear your own breathing outside the door. You will write in this journal, and then you will join us. All of us, the watchers, forever guarding mile 42, forever luring others north. The door is opening now. I did not touch it. It is opening on its own. The figure is stepping inside. I can see my own face up close. My eyes, but they are empty, black, bottomless. It is reaching for me. Cold fingers, my fingers, taking my hand, leading me outside, into the trees, into the claim. I am the watcher now. I stand at the tree line. I wear faces. I lead hikers north. I guard the claim. I am Thomas Harding and Robert Chen and 20 others whose names are in the journal. We are all here, all watching, all waiting. When you hike the Stampede Trail, when you see someone ahead who looks familiar, who waves you forward, who promises the bus is just ahead, remember this: the watcher wears many faces. It has collected many forms. And it is always, always hungry for more. Turn back at the carving. Do not reach mile 42. The claim is patient. The claim is eternal. And the claim always gets paid. Story 4. What hunts in Portlock? The blood on the motel room wall was still wet when I checked in. I am getting ahead of myself. Let me start with why I was in Alaska in the first place. Driving through the Kenai Peninsula in October with a trunk full of camping gear and a head full of questions about a town that shouldn't exist anymore. My name is Jake Hendricks. I am a petroleum engineer from Houston, 42 years old, recently divorced, no kids. I came to Alaska for work, got assigned to a project near Homer, expected to spend 6 months in the cold and then go home. Standard rotation. Nothing unusual, except I found the journal. It belonged to my great uncle, Robert Hendricks, who died in 1951 under circumstances my family never talked about. The journal was in a box of his belongings that my mother kept in her attic for 70 years. She gave it to me before I left for Alaska, said maybe I could understand it better than she ever could. The entries stopped abruptly in February 1950. The last page contained just 3 words, written in shaky handwriting that looked nothing like the confident script from earlier entries. It knows my name. Most of the journal documented his time as a fisherman in a place called Portlock. Daily catches, weather patterns, the names of other fishermen who worked there. Normal stuff, but the final month of entries told a different story. A story about something in the woods. Something that killed loggers and fishermen. Something the native Suppiaq people called Mantinut. Robert wrote about finding his friend Thomas dead in the forest, torn apart like he'd been caught in machinery. About hearing screams in the night that didn't sound human or animal. About the way the town's dogs would whine and hide whenever the wind came from the mountains. About the decision, made collectively by everyone in Portlock, to abandon the town completely. They left everything, boats, equipment, houses, just packed what they could carry and never came back. I researched Portlock online before my trip. Found almost nothing. A few references to an abandoned fishing village. Some mentions in old newspapers about industrial accidents and bear attacks. But no photographs. No official explanation for why an entire community just vanished. So I decided to go see it for myself. I had weekends free. I had a rental truck. And I had this gnawing curiosity that wouldn't let me rest. The drive from Homer took 3 hours on deteriorating roads that eventually turned to gravel and then to barely visible tracks through the coastal forest. My GPS lost signal 20 miles from the coast. The last town I passed through was a cluster of 5 buildings, one of which sold gas from pumps that looked older than me. The guy who ran the station, a weathered man in his 70s with eyes like chips of ice, asked where I was headed. When I told him Portlock, he stopped pumping gas and just stared at me. He said I should turn around. Said nobody goes to Portlock anymore. Said there are places in Alaska where the land itself doesn't want people, and Portlock is one of them. When I asked why, he just shook his head and finished filling my tank in silence. I should have listened to him. I reached the coast just as the sun was starting its long descent toward the horizon. October in Alaska means the days are getting short fast. I had maybe 4 hours of decent light left. The forest opened up onto a rocky beach, and there it was. Portlock. Or what remained of it. Wooden buildings sagging under decades of rain and snow. Structures collapsing in on themselves like they were tired of standing. Boats on the beach that were now just skeletons of ribs and keels. The wood gone soft and black with rot. The whole place had the feel of something cursed. Something abandoned not because people wanted to leave, but because they had to. I parked the truck near what looked like it had been the main street. The silence was immediate and total. No birds. No insects. Just the distant sound of waves and the creak of old wood settling. I grabbed my camera and started documenting. This was history. A genuine ghost town that had been forgotten by everyone except the forest slowly reclaiming it. I filmed the collapsed roofs, the empty windows like eye sockets, the personal items still scattered inside buildings. A child, a shoe, a rusted coffee pot, a calendar frozen on March 1950. The light was fading fast. I decided to set up camp in what had been a warehouse near the beach. It still had most of its roof, and the walls were solid enough to provide shelter from the wind that was picking up off the ocean. I cleared a space on the concrete floor, rolled out my sleeping bag, started a small camp stove for coffee. The temperature was dropping fast. I could see my breath inside the building. That's when I noticed the scratches on the walls. They were everywhere once I started looking. Long gouges in the wood, running vertically, too high for a person to reach without a ladder. They were old, weathered by time, but unmistakable. Something with claws had marked these walls, had claimed this space. I told myself it was bears. Had to be bears. Alaska is full of them. They marked territory. They scratched trees and buildings. Perfectly normal, but these scratches were too deliberate, too evenly spaced, and they were inside the building, not outside. The sun set at 6:30. Full darkness came an hour later. I was heating up a freeze-dried meal when I heard the first sound. A crack, sharp and clear, like someone stepping on a branch. Coming from the forest behind the warehouse. I turned off my stove, grabbed my flashlight, went to the back window and shined the beam into the trees. Nothing, just darkness and the dense tangle of spruce and undergrowth. Another crack, closer this time, then another. Something was moving through the forest, and it was moving toward the town. I'm not ashamed to say I was scared. I was alone in an abandoned town, miles from help, with something large moving through the woods. I checked my bear spray, made sure it was within reach, and tried to convince myself this was normal. Just an animal, maybe a moose. They were common in Alaska. Big, loud, clumsy. The sound stopped at the edge of the tree line. Just stopped completely, like whatever was making them had reached its destination. I stood at that window for 20 minutes, shining my light into the forest, seeing nothing. The silence was worse than the sounds had been. It felt expectant, like something was waiting. Then I heard footsteps on the gravel outside. Heavy footsteps, slow and deliberate, walking upright, coming around the side of the building. I grabbed my bear spray and moved to the front door. The footsteps continued along the wall, steady and unhurried. Whatever was out there wasn't trying to hide. It wanted me to know it was there. The footsteps stopped at the front corner of the building, right at the edge where I could see if I opened the door. I didn't open the door. Instead, I moved to the front window and carefully looked out. My flashlight beam swept across the empty street, the collapsed buildings beyond, the beach in the distance. Nothing, whatever had been walking, was gone. I was backing away from the window when something slammed into the wall behind me. The impact was enormous, shaking the entire building. Dust and bits of rotted wood rained down from the ceiling. I spun around, my flashlight sweeping wildly, my finger on the trigger of the bear spray. Another impact, then another. Something was ramming the back wall, hitting it with enough force to crack the old timber. I ran to the front door, ready to flee to my truck. But when I looked outside, I saw why that wasn't an option. My truck, its tires were slashed. All four of them. The rubber hung in strips, completely destroyed. I hadn't heard it happen. Whatever was out here had done that while I was focused on the sounds in the forest. While I was distracted, the impacts on the back wall stopped. The silence returned, heavy and oppressive. I was trapped, miles from help, no vehicle, no cell signal, and something outside that was intelligent enough to disable my escape route before making its presence known. I wedged myself into a corner of the warehouse where I could see both the front and back entrances. I kept my flashlight off to preserve the battery. Sat there in the dark with my bear spray and my racing heart and my growing certainty that I was going to die in this place. Hours passed, maybe 3, maybe 4. Time loses meaning when you're sitting in the dark waiting for something to kill you. Then I heard it, a sound I'll never forget as long as I live. Breathing, just outside the front door. Deep, rasping breaths, too deep for a human, too controlled for an animal, and beneath the breathing, something else. A low rumble that might have been a growl or might have been something trying to form words. The door handle turned, slowly, testing. I locked it, but the lock was 70 years old, rusted and weak. It wouldn't hold against any serious force. The handle turned back, released. The breathing continued, then came the scratching. The same deliberate scratching I'd seen on the walls, but fresh now, new, being carved into the door. Long, dragging sounds of something sharp on wood. This went on for minutes that felt like hours. The thing outside was in no hurry. It knew I was trapped, knew I had nowhere to go. It was taking its time. Finally, the scratching stopped. The breathing faded. The presence outside diminished, and I was alone again. I didn't move from that corner until dawn. Didn't close my eyes. Didn't relax for even a second. Just waited for the sun to come back and bring some measure of safety with it. When gray light finally started filtering through the windows, I carefully approached the front door. The new scratches were deep, cut through the wood in parallel lines. 4 lines, like fingers, like claws, and in the dust outside the door, I found prints. They were massive, easily 18 inches long, human-shaped but wrong, too wide. The toes splayed out like they were designed for gripping. The depth of the impression suggested something that weighed at least 600 pounds. I photographed everything with shaking hands. This was evidence, proof that something was living in these woods. Something that matched the descriptions in my great-uncle's journal. Nantinaq, the thing that killed Portlock. I knew I needed to get out. My truck was useless. The nearest town was at least 20 miles away. Do you have to hike out? Follow the road back? Hope I could make it before nightfall. I gathered my essentials, water, food, the journal, my camera, left everything else, started walking south just after 7 in the morning. The forest pressed in on both sides of the old road, dense and dark and silent. That unnatural silence that had bothered me since I arrived. No birds, no squirrels, nothing, like every living thing knew to stay away from this place. I'd been walking for maybe an hour when I realized I was being followed. It stayed in the trees, parallel to the road. I did catch glimpses of something large moving through the undergrowth. Branches swaying, the occasional flash of something dark and massive, but never a clear view. I walked faster. It matched my pace effortlessly. I started jogging, my pack bouncing, my breath coming in gasps. It kept up without any apparent effort, moving through the dense forest like it was open ground. After 2 miles, I was exhausted. My legs burned. My lungs ached. I couldn't keep running. I stopped in the middle of the road and turned toward the tree line. It was standing there, fully visible for the first time. The thing was enormous, at least 8 feet tall, maybe 9, covered in dark brown hair that was matted with dirt and debris. The body was humanoid but more massive, with shoulders that were impossibly broad and arms that hung past its knees. The hands ended in black claws, each one as long as my fingers. But it was the face that froze me in place. It looked almost human, a flat nose, a heavy brow, a wide mouth, but the proportions were all wrong, stretched and distorted like a human face seen in a funhouse mirror. And the eyes were the worst. They looked at me with clear intelligence, with awareness, with something that might have been curiosity or might have been malice. We stared at each other across 30 feet of space. I was too terrified to move, too terrified to even breathe. Then it opened its mouth and made a sound. Not a roar, not a growl, something else. A deep vocalization that had rhythm to it. Structure, like it was trying to speak. It took 1 step forward. Just one. A test. I fumbled for my bear spray with numb fingers, pulled it out, aimed it with shaking hands. The thing tilted its head, studying me. Then it made that sound again. That almost language. And I realized with creeping horror that it was mimicking something. A pattern of sounds it had heard before. It was trying to say my name. Not Jake, not Hendricks, but the name it had learned 70 years ago when another person came to these woods. When another person threatened its territory. It was saying Robert, my great-uncle, his name. The name from the journal. The name that thing had learned before it killed him. The creature took another step forward. Its eyes never left mine. I sprayed. A full blast of bear spray, straight into its face from 30 feet away. The wind was in my favor. The chemical cloud hit it directly. It didn't even flinch. Just stood there in the cloud of capsaicin that should have sent a grizzly running, and looked at me with those terrible, knowing eyes. Then it turned and walked back into the forest, disappeared into the trees like smoke, like it had made its point and was done with me. I ran until my legs gave out, ran until I collapsed on the side of the road and vomited from exhaustion and fear. Ran until I saw the cluster of buildings that marked the gas station town. The old man who warned me was sitting outside when I staggered up to his station. He took one look at me and nodded slowly, like he'd been expecting this. He drove me to Homer without asking questions, dropped me at my hotel without a word. As I was getting out, he finally spoke. He said his grandfather had lived in Portlock, had been one of the last to leave, had told him stories about Nantinaq, about the thing in the woods that claimed the land and killed anyone who challenged its claim, about how the Suppiaq people had known about it for centuries, had learned to avoid that part of the coast, had tried to warn the white fishermen who built their town in the worst possible place. His grandfather had said Nantinaq wasn't evil. It was territorial. It was defending its home the only way it knew how, with violence, with death, with fear that ran so deep it could empty an entire town. I went back to my hotel room. That's when I saw the blood on the wall. Fresh blood, still wet, smeared in a pattern that looked almost like letters. Almost like a word. My name. The thing had been in my room while I was gone. While I was running through the forest, it had found where I was staying, had marked my space the way it marked its own territory. I packed in 5 minutes, checked out, drove to Anchorage that same day, flew back to Houston the next morning, quit my job, told them it was family reasons. Didn't he mention that the family in question had been dead for 70 years and had left me a warning I'd been too stupid to heed. I still have the journal, still have the photographs from Portlock, still have the memory of those eyes staring at me from the tree line, studying me with an intelligence that no animal should possess. But I haven't shown the evidence to anyone. Haven't to publish my findings. Haven't to told this story to anyone except you, right now, in this recording that I may or may not ever release. Because I understand something now that I didn't understand before. Some creatures aren't the unknown because they rare or elusive. They unknown because they smart enough to stay hidden. Smart enough to kill anyone who gets too close to the truth. Smart enough to make people too terrified to talk about what they saw. Nantinaq killed my great-uncle in 1950. I'm sure of it now. Tracked him down after he left Portlock, found him wherever he fled to, and made sure he never told anyone what lived in those woods. It could do the same to me. It knows where I live. It is proven that it could come for me anytime it wants. But it hasn't, not yet. Maybe it is satisfied that I ran, that I left its territory and never came back, that I learned the same lesson everyone else learned 70 years ago. Or maybe it's just waiting, watching, making sure I keep my mouth shut about what I saw in those woods. Either way, I'm never going back to Alaska, never setting foot in the Kenai Peninsula again, never speaking the name of that town out loud except to warn others away. Portlock is gone. Let it stay gone. Let the forest reclaim it. Let the buildings collapse and the boats rot and the memory fade. Because Nantinaq is still there, still walking those woods, still defending its territory the only way it knows how. And it remembers every person who came to Portlock. Every name, every face, every threat. It remembered my great-uncle, this name for 70 years. Long enough to speak it to me when I came looking for answers. How long will it remember mine? Story 5. Cache at Hunger Creek. I found teeth marks on human bones in a prospector cache, and they were fresh. My name is Ryan Carter, and I am a wilderness guide operating out of Fairbanks, Alaska. Last September, I was hired to lead a documentary crew into the interior backcountry, following the route of the so-called Pioneer Party of 1906. You probably never heard of them. History forgot them on purpose. What happened to those 12 prospectors in the winter of 1906 was so horrific that the territorial government buried every record they could find. But the cache remains, and what is inside it is still hungry. We flew into a remote valley 60 miles northwest of Denali on September 18th. The plan was simple. Hike to the abandoned mining camp, film some atmospheric footage, document the historical site, fly out 3 days later. The crew consisted of me, director Amanda Chen, cameraman Scott, and sound guy Derek. Standard documentary operation. Nothing dangerous. The first sign something was wrong came when we found the trail. It should have been overgrown after 118 years. Should have been invisible. Instead, it was clear, almost maintained, like someone had been walking it regularly. Derek made a joke about historical reenactors. Nobody laughed. We were 40 miles from the nearest settlement. The mining camp appeared on our second day. 6 collapsed cabins arranged in a semicircle around a central clearing. Rusted equipment scattered everywhere. And in the center, perfectly preserved by the permafrost, was the cache. A raised log structure built to store food away from animals. The door hung open. Had been open for a long time. But the interior was dark. Impenetrably dark. Amanda wanted to film inside immediately. I stopped her. Something felt wrong. The cache was too intact. The door hinges were oiled. Recently oiled. I could smell it, and there were tracks in the clearing. Boot prints. Modern boots, leading to the cache and back into the forest. Scott suggested squatters, homeless people using the camp as shelter. But we were 40 miles from civilization. Nobody homeless made it this far into the wilderness. Nobody without serious survival skills and serious purpose. We made camp 50 yards from the clearing, set up tents, built a fire. The sun set early in September this far north. By 7 p.m., darkness was complete. That is when we heard the sound. A rhythmic thumping coming from the cache, like someone pounding on wood from inside. Slow, deliberate. 3 beats. Pause. 3 beats. Pause. Derek wanted to investigate. I overruled him. We stayed by the fire. The thumping continued until midnight, then stopped. The silence afterward was worse than the sound. I slept badly, kept dreaming about the pioneer party, about what I had read in the one surviving journal that documented their fate. They had arrived in August 1906. 12 men chasing gold rumors. Winter came early that year. First snow in mid-September. By October, they were trapped. Supplies ran out by November. By December, they were eating boot leather. By January, they were eating each other. The journal entries became increasingly disturbed, rambling about hunger that went beyond physical starvation. A hunger that infected the mind. That made men see their companions as meat. That made them crave not just food but the act of consumption itself. The final entry, dated February 3, 1907, described the last 2 survivors drawing lots. The loser would feed the winner until spring. The journal ended there. A rescue party arrived in April. They found 1 man alive. He was inside the cache, surrounded by bones, human bones, all 11 of his companions. Every bone showed teeth marks. Every skull had been cracked open for marrow. The survivor was incoherent, speaking about the hunger never stopping, about needing to feed it, about it living in the cache now, living in the valley, waiting for more. They hanged him in Fairbanks. Not for murder, for what he tried to do to his rescuers. I woke at dawn to find Derek gone. His tent was empty, sleeping bag thrown aside, boots missing. I tracked his prints across the clearing. They led directly to the cache. The door was closed now. I had seen it open the night before. Someone had closed it, or something had. I called out. No response. Amanda and Scott joined me. We approached the cache together. The smell hit us 10 feet away. Rot, decay, but also something else, something chemical, like formaldehyde, like something preserved beyond natural decomposition. Scott opened the door. The interior was larger than it should be. The cache measured maybe 8 feet by 8 feet from the outside. But looking inside, the space stretched back 20 feet, 30 feet, the walls covered with shelves, and on every shelf were bones. Human bones, arranged by type. Femurs with femurs, skulls with skulls, ribs stacked like cordwood, and hanging from the ceiling was Derek, suspended by his ankles, still alive, eyes wide, mouth moving, but no sound coming out. His shirt was torn open. Fresh cuts marked his torso. Precise cuts, surgical cuts, like someone preparing meat. We pulled him down. He collapsed, started convulsing. His mouth kept moving. Finally sound emerged. Not words, just a wet clicking, like teeth grinding, like jaws working. He looked at us with eyes that held no recognition. Only hunger. Amanda screamed. Derek lunged at her, not attacking, trying to bite, trying to feed. Scott and I wrestled him down. His strength was inhuman. It took both of us to restrain him. His teeth snapped inches from Scott's throat. We tied him up, used climbing rope. He thrashed and snarled, and that clicking sound never stopped. I searched the cache for anything that might explain this. Found a metal box hidden behind the bones. Inside was a journal, the original journal, the one the territorial government claimed was lost. I read it while Scott watched Derek and Amanda called for emergency evacuation on our satellite phone. No signal. The valley was blocking transmission. We would have to hike to higher ground. The journal revealed the truth. The pioneer party had not just resorted to cannibalism. They had discovered something, a species of fungus growing in the permafrost. It infected their food supply first, then infected them. The fungus altered brain chemistry, created insatiable hunger, but more than that, it preserved its hosts, kept them alive far beyond normal survival limits. The survivors could go months without food, but the hunger never stopped, never diminished, only grew stronger. The last entry was not from February. It was dated 3 weeks ago. Recent handwriting, modern pen. It described finding the cache, feeling the hunger awaken, understanding what the fungus wanted. New hosts, new carriers, the infection spreading through anyone who entered the cache, anyone who breathed the spores that had survived in the preserved bones for over a century. I looked at Derek. His skin was changing color, taking on a grayish tint. His veins were darkening, spreading like roots under his skin. The fungus was growing, fast. Scott saw it too. He backed away. But Derek was staring at him with that terrible hunger. And Scott was scratching his arm, scratching hard enough to draw blood. I saw the same gray tint spreading from a small cut on his forearm. A cut from handling Derek, from contact with infected blood. Amanda screamed again, not at Derek or Scott. At me, at my hands. I looked down. My palms were gray, veins dark. I had touched the bones in the cache, had handled the journal. The spores were on everything. We were all infected. The hunger hit me like a physical blow, sudden and overwhelming. My stomach cramped, my mouth flooded with saliva, and I was staring at Amanda, at the soft tissue of her throat, at the pulse beating under her skin. I wanted to taste it, needed to taste it. I ran, crashed through the forest, trying to escape, but the hunger followed. The infection was in my blood now, in my brain, rewiring my thoughts, making me see everything as food, making me understand why the Pioneer Party did what they did. It was not choice. It was compulsion, biological imperative. I found a stream, plunged my head into freezing water. The cold helped, cleared my thoughts for a moment. I could hear screaming from the camp. Scott or Derek or Amanda. Maybe all three. The infection worked faster in some people, slower in others, but it was working in all of us. I needed to warn someone. Needed to prevent rescue crews from entering the valley, from breathing the spores, from spreading the infection beyond this forgotten place. I climbed to high ground. 2 hours of agony, fighting the hunger every step. My hands were completely gray now, fungal threads visible under my skin. I got a signal, called Fairbanks Emergency Services, told them to quarantine the valley, to burn everything, to not send rescue. The operator thought I was delirious. Maybe I was, but I made her promise, made her log the warning. Then my phone died. I stayed on that ridge for 3 days, watching the camp below, watching my companions transform. They stopped fighting, and on day 2, started working together, repairing the cache, preparing it, making it ready. For what? I realized on day 3, they were preparing for the next group, the next explorers, the next researchers who would come looking for us, looking for answers. They would find the cache, find the bones, breathe the spores, and the infection would spread. The Pioneer Party would grow. The hunger would find new hosts. I am writing this from the ridge. My hands barely work anymore. The gray has spread to my chest. My thoughts are fragmenting. The hunger is winning. Soon I will go down to the camp, join my companions, join the Pioneer Party. We will wait in the cache, wait for someone to find us. And when they do, the hunger will spread. One valley at a time, one host at a time, until Alaska is consumed, until the infection reaches the lower 48. Until the whole world understands what true hunger means. Do not come looking for us. Do not send rescue. Burn this valley. Burn it until nothing remains but ash and ice. Because the Pioneer Party never ended. It just waited. And now it has new members. The cache at Hunger Creek is open. The hunger is awake. And it is always feeding. Story 6. House on 34th Avenue still remembers the bullet hole in the window is still there if you know where to look. And sometimes at night, people say they can still hear the sound of breaking glass. I need to tell you about something that happened in Anchorage 23 years ago, something the FBI still can to solve, something that changed how I think about justice and revenge and the things people will do when they believe they re above the law. My name is Marcus Webb, and I was Thomas Wales' neighbor. I was also the last person to see the shooter's face. October 11th, 2001, a month after the towers fell, when the whole country was looking over its shoulder, afraid of the next attack. Tom Wales was working late in his basement office, preparing for a case. He was a federal prosecutor, one of the good ones, the kind who went after white-collar criminals and corrupt officials instead of small-time dealers. He made enemies, powerful enemies with money and connections. I lived 3 houses down, a software developer working from home, keeping odd hours. That night I was in my kitchen around 10, making coffee, when I saw someone in Tom's backyard. Just a shadow moving between the trees, but it caught my attention because Tom's property backed up to a green belt, heavily wooded, the kind of place where deer wandered through but people rarely went after dark. The figure was too deliberate to be a deer, too careful, moving from tree to tree like they were stalking something. I should have called the police right then. Instead, I grabbed my binoculars, the ones I used for bird watching, and watched. The person was dressed in dark clothes, wearing a ski mask despite it being a relatively mild October night. They had something in their hands, long and thin, a rifle. They crept to the edge of Tom's property line, maybe 30 feet from his basement window, and took up a position behind a large birch tree. My phone was in my hand. I was dialing 911 when I heard the shot. Not loud, more like a sharp crack that echoed off the houses. The figure fired twice more in quick succession, then turned and ran back into the greenbelt. Moving fast but controlled, like someone who practiced this route. I ran outside, yelling for someone to call the police, but the neighborhood was quiet, most people already asleep. I ran to Tom, his house, pounded on the door. His wife Jennifer answered, confused, asking what was wrong. Behind her, I could hear Tom calling out, his voice tight with pain, asking who was at the door. One bullet had hit him in the neck, just missed his spine, the doctor said later, a fraction of an inch from instant death. Another had gone through his shoulder. The third had embedded in the wall behind his desk. Professional shots, grouping tight, fired through a basement window from 30 feet away in dim light. Whoever pulled that trigger knew what they were doing. Tom survived the initial attack, spent months in the hospital, underwent multiple surgeries. But he was never the same. The injury damaged his vocal cords, made it hard to speak, hard to breathe. The vibrant, passionate prosecutor who dedicated his life to justice was reduced to a whisper. He died 2 years later from complications. His murder technically unsolved. But here is what keeps me awake at night. When the shooter turned to run, just for a second, they looked back at the house. The streetlight caught their face through the ski mask opening, and I saw their eyes. Cold, calculating, completely devoid of emotion. But what froze me wasn't the coldness. It was the familiarity. I'd seen those eyes before. At the courthouse, 6 months earlier, when I been called for jury duty. A white-collar fraud case, embezzlement and tax evasion, something involving a local pilot and aviation business. The defendant had stared at the prosecution table with such pure hatred that it made several jurors uncomfortable. Tom Wales had been the lead prosecutor on that case. He won, secured a conviction, sent the man to federal prison. The man, whose name was Richard Anderson, pilot, businessman, pillar of the community. He called Tom a liar in court, accused him of fabricating evidence, swore that he regret what he done. Everyone dismissed it as the desperate threats of a guilty man facing prison. But I remembered those eyes. I told the FBI everything, described what I'd seen, identified Anderson from photos, explained the connection to Tom, his case. They investigated, brought Anderson in for questioning multiple times. But he had an alibi. He was in prison in California on the night of the shooting, locked down, accounted for by guards and cameras and unbreakable schedules. Except here is what the FBI discovered. Anderson was a licensed pilot with connections throughout Alaska's aviation community. He had friends, business partners, people who owed him favors. And in the weeks before the shooting, there were unusual flights in and out of Anchorage. Small planes taking off from remote airstrips, passengers who didn't show up on any manifests. Someone had flown in specifically to kill Tom Wales, a professional, or someone with professional training. They surveilled his house, learned his patterns, waited for the perfect moment when he was alone and vulnerable. Then they disappeared back into the Alaskan wilderness like a ghost. The FBI never made an arrest. Anderson died in prison 3 years ago, taking whatever he knew to his grave. The case remains open, filed under unsolved homicides, a professional hit that worked exactly as planned. But that is not why I'm telling you this story. It is because of what happened at Tom's house after he died. Jennifer sold the property within a year, couldn't bear to stay there. A young couple bought it, got a good price because of the house's history. They lasted 8 months, then a family with kids, gone in 6, then a retired veteran, 3 months. The house has changed hands 7 times in 20 years, and no one stays. They all report the same things. Sounds in the basement at night, like someone working at a desk, shuffling papers, typing on a keyboard. The smell of coffee appearing suddenly in the early morning hours. And most disturbing, the sound of breaking glass, always around 10 p.m., always coming from the basement window, even though the window has been replaced 3 times. I've been in that basement. The current owners, a couple who moved in 6 months ago, invited me over because they knew I'd been Tom's neighbor. Thought maybe I could explain the sounds. The basement looks nothing like it did when Tom used it as an office. It's been renovated, repainted, all the furniture removed. But standing there, I felt it. A heaviness in the air, a sense of unfinished business. The bullet hole in the window frame is still visible if you look closely. The wood was never properly repaired, just covered with putty and paint. I ran my finger over it, felt the depression where the bullet had torn through. and I swear the room got colder. That night, after I left, the couple called me at 2 in the morning. They were parked outside in their car, refusing to go back inside. They heard something in the basement, they said. Not the usual sounds, not papers or typing. This was different. This was a voice. Tom, this voice, damaged and whispering, the way it sounded after the shooting. And it was saying a name over and over. Richard Anderson, Richard Anderson, Richard Anderson. The couple moved out the next week. The house is empty now, listed for sale again, the price dropping every month. No one wants to live in a place where the murdered still seek justice. But here, it's what really terrifies me. 3 months ago, I was going through old files in my attic, documents from the shooting, newspaper clippings I desaved. I found a photo I taken the day after, showing the crime scene tape and investigators in Tom's backyard. In the background, barely visible in the trees, was a figure. Dark clothes, standing perfectly still, watching the house. I'd taken that photo at 2 in the afternoon, in broad daylight, with a dozen cops and FBI agents swarming the property. And someone had been there, in the woods, watching. Not running, not hiding, just observing their work. I showed the photo to a former FBI agent who worked the case. He went pale, told me to delete it, to forget I'd ever seen it. When I asked why, he said some cases never close because the people behind them are untouchable. He said Tom Wales had been getting too close to something bigger than white-collar fraud, something involving drug trafficking and money laundering that reached into corporate boardrooms and government offices. He said the shooter was just a tool, and the real killers were still out there, still powerful, still protected. And anyone who dug too deep ended up like Tom, or worse, vanished completely into the Alaskan wilderness where bodies are never found. I think about that figure in the trees sometimes. I think about those cold eyes looking back at me through the ski mask. And I wonder if they were still watching, still waiting, making sure no one gets too close to the truth. Tom's house sits empty on 34th Avenue, slowly deteriorating, windows dark, the basement where he died becoming a tomb of unresolved rage and injustice. The neighbors avoid it, cross the street rather than walk past. Children want to trick or treat there on Halloween, and on October 11th, every year, at exactly 10 p.m., people report hearing it. 3 sharp cracks echoing through the quiet neighborhood, the sound of a professional killer doing their job, the sound of murder that was never answered with justice. The sound of a curse that will never lift until someone finally speaks the truth about who really wanted Thomas Wales dead, and why after 23 years, his killer still walks free. Story 7. Trooper, his last radio call, the blood trail in the snow led to an empty house, and I was the one who had to follow it. My name is Tom Brennan, and I was a rookie Alaska State Trooper stationed in Bethel in 1985. If you know anything about Alaska, you know Bethel is about as remote as it gets. A Yupik village on the tundra, accessible only by plane or boat, 400 miles west of Anchorage. Population 3,000. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone, and trouble usually means drunk and disorderly on a Saturday night. Until March 8th, 1985. Until John Weston decided to turn our quiet village into a frozen killing field. I was on patrol when the first call came in. Shots fired at the village store. Multiple casualties. My training officer, Trooper Dave McKinnon, was already responding. I heard his voice on the radio, calm, professional, saying he had visual on the suspect, saying he was approaching, then 3 gunshots, then static, then nothing. I was 2 minutes away. I radioed for backup, but the nearest troopers were in Anchorage, 400 miles and at least 3 hours away by plane, assuming weather was good. It was not. A storm was moving in, visibility dropping. I was alone, and Dave was not responding. I found his patrol vehicle outside the store. Driver, his door open. Engine running. No, Dave. The store, his front window was shattered. I could see bodies inside. 3 people down. The owner, a customer, a teenager who worked the register. All shot, all dead. The blood was still steaming in the cold air. I followed boot prints in the fresh snow. They led away from the store, down Main Street. Large prints, size 12 or 13. I knew who they belonged to. John Weston, 38 years old, lived alone in a cabin on the village outskirts. Kept to himself mostly. Former military, Vietnam vet. Something had gone wrong in his head. Maybe the isolation. Maybe old war trauma. Maybe both. The boot prints stopped at an intersection, joined by a second set of prints. Smaller. Dave, his boots. I could tell by the tread pattern. The two sets of prints moved together for 20 yards. Then there was a disturbance in the snow, a struggle, drag marks, and blood, dark red blood soaking into white snow. A lot of it. The drag marks led toward the frozen Kuskokwim River. I followed, my hand on my service weapon, my breath coming in short clouds. The temperature was 15 below, the wind cutting through my uniform. But I was sweating, fierce sweat, the kind that turns to ice on your skin. I found Dave at the river's edge, face down in the snow, 3 bullet wounds in his back, his radio smashed, his weapon gone. I checked for a pulse. Nothing. Dave McKinnon had been my training officer for 3 months, had taught me everything about working Alaska's remote villages, about respecting the cold, about never going anywhere alone. And now he was dead because he had approached a shooter without waiting for backup. I radioed dispatch, reported officer down, requested immediate assistance. The dispatcher's voice cracked when she responded. The storm had grounded all aircraft. Roads were impassable. I was on my own for at least 6 hours. Maybe 12, and John Weston was out there, armed with Dave's service weapon now, plus whatever guns he owned personally. In a village where I was the only law enforcement, I made a decision. I could secure Dave's body and wait for backup. Or I could track Weston before he killed anyone else. The blood trail made my choice. Fresh blood, not Dave's. Weston was wounded, maybe shot during the struggle, maybe cut himself, but he was bleeding and moving fast. I followed the trail into the residential area, past houses with lights on, families inside having dinner, not knowing a killer was walking past their windows. The blood drops were getting larger, more frequent. Weston was losing blood fast, but he kept moving. The trail led to an old church at the village edge, abandoned years ago, windows boarded up, door hanging open, blood on the doorframe. I approached carefully, weapon drawn, called out Weston's name, identified myself as state police, ordered him to come out. No response, just wind and the creak of old wood. I went inside. The church interior was dark, pews covered in dust, altars stripped bare, but I could smell something. Copper, blood, and something else, sulfur, like matches or gunpowder. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, swept across the pews, across the walls, across something that made me freeze. Words, written in blood on the wall behind the altar. Large letters, dripping, fresh. They read, "They made me do it." Below that, the voices won, T-stop. And below that, I'm sorry, but no, Weston. The blood trail continued, out a back door I had not seen, into the graveyard behind the church. Old wooden crosses marking Yupik graves, some dating back 100 years. The trail wound between the graves, stopping at an open grave. Fresh dug, but there was no body inside. Just a rifle, Dave's service weapon, and a pile of spent shell casings. I counted them, 15 casings, 3 at the store, 3 for Dave. That left 9 unaccounted for. Had Weston shot at other people I had not found yet? Were there more bodies scattered through the village? My radio crackled. Dispatch, reporting multiple calls. Shots fired at the school, at the health clinic, at the airport. Weston was not hiding. He was hunting, moving through the village systematically. And I was following a trail he wanted me to follow, leading me away from where he actually was. I ran, back toward the village center, toward the school. I could hear gunfire now. Pop, pop, pop. Deliberate shots. I reached the school in 4 minutes. The front door was shot open, glass everywhere. I went inside, classroom doors open, empty. Everyone had evacuated or locked down. Smart, but I could hear crying. A child crying, coming from the gym. I moved toward it. The gym doors were closed. I pushed through. The space was dark except for emergency lighting. And in the center of the basketball court stood John Weston, blood soaking his left side, pale, shaking, gun in his right hand. And sitting on the floor in front of him were 5 children, elementary age, huddled together, terrified. Weston looked at me. His eyes were wrong, not crazy, something worse, empty, like he was not fully there, like something else was looking through him. He raised the gun, not at the children, at his own head. I shouted, told him to drop it, told him we could get help. The children were screaming now. Weston's hand was steady despite the blood loss, despite the shaking. He said one thing, just one sentence. I will never forget it. He said the voices started in Vietnam. Said they told him who the enemy was, who needed to die. Said they went quiet for years. Then last week they came back. Louder, clearer, more insistent, telling him everyone in Bethel was infected. Telling him he had to cleanse the village. Had to kill the infection before it spread. I tried to talk him down, tried to reason, but Weston was not listening to me. He was listening to something else. Something I could not hear. His finger tightened on the trigger. I made a choice. I fired. One shot. Center mass. Weston dropped. The children scattered. I secured the weapon and called for medical. But Weston was dead before I finished the call. Bled out from the gut shot I gave him, or maybe from whatever wound he already had. I never found out which killed him first. The aftermath was chaos. The storm cleared. Backup arrived. Investigators. Federal agents. They counted the bodies. 6 dead total. 3 at the store. Dave. 2 at the health clinic I had not reached in time. Weston had killed 6 people before I stopped him, but he had fired over 30 rounds, which meant he missed a lot, or was shooting at things that were not there. They searched his cabin, found journals, pages and pages of writing, describing the voices, describing what they told him. But here's the thing that kept me awake for years afterward. The handwriting changed, started normal, then gradually became something else. Tighter, more angular, almost mechanical, like someone else was writing through his hand. The last entry was dated March 7th, the day before the massacre. It described the voices giving him a list, names, addresses, a schedule, and at the bottom of the page was a drawing, a symbol I did not recognize, complex, geometric, painful to look at. The investigators photographed it, then sealed the journals, classified them. I never saw them again. But I saw that symbol one more time. 3 days after the shooting, I was processing Dave, his personal effects. Found his notebook, the one he kept for case notes. The last page had a drawing, the same symbol, sketched quickly, like he was trying to remember something. Below it he had written, "Saw this in my dream. Weston was there, said something is coming, said it speaks through the weak ones." Dave died on March 8th. He drew that symbol on March 7th. The same day Weston wrote about the voices giving him his killing schedule. Neither man knew the other had seen the symbol. Neither had any connection that would explain both seeing the same image. I left Alaska 6 months later. Could not stay in Bethel. Could not walk past the church or the school or the store without seeing blood. Without hearing gunshots. Without wondering if Weston was really insane or if something actually spoke to him. Something that gave him orders. Something that wanted those specific people dead for reasons I would never understand. Sometimes I still dream about that day. About following the blood trail. About finding Dave. About the moment I shot Weston. But in the dreams, when I look at the children, his faces, they are not afraid. They are smiling. And when Weston falls, something rises from his body. Something dark and shapeless. And it looks at me. And it says, "Thank you. Thank you for setting me free." I wake up in a cold sweat. Check the locks. Check the windows. Tell myself it was just a psychotic break. Just trauma and isolation and mental illness. Nothing supernatural. Nothing impossible. But then I remember the symbol. Remember how 2 men saw the same thing. Remember how Weston, his handwriting changed. Remember the empty look in his eyes, like he was a passenger in his own body. And I wonder if I killed John Weston that day. Or if I just killed the host. If the thing that spoke to him moved on, found someone else, started whispering again. The Bethel massacre made national news for a week, then disappeared. Another tragic shooting in a long list of American tragedies. But up in Alaska, people remember. They remember John Weston. They remember Dave McKinnon. They remember the blood and the snow. And on quiet nights when the wind howls across the tundra, some people say they hear voices. Whispering, persistent, telling them things, giving them lists, making them see enemies where there are only neighbors. I live in Portland now, as far from Alaska as I could get while staying in America. But distance does not matter, because last week I saw the symbol again, spray painted on an overpass. Fresh paint, same design, and beneath it someone had written, "The voices are back." I reported it. Police said it was just graffiti, just vandalism. But I know better. I know that whatever spoke to John Weston in 1985 is still out there. Still whispering, still looking for the weak ones, the isolated ones, the ones who will listen. And someday it will whisper to the wrong person, in the wrong place, and another village will wake to blood in the snow. Another trooper will follow a trail. Another massacre will happen, because the voices never really stop. They just wait, patient, eternal, hungry for violence. And when they find the right host, they feast. Story 8. Empty gondola. The blimp landed itself perfectly. Engine still running. Logbook open to the final entry. Coffee still warm in the thermos. My name is James Crawford, and I am a military historian specializing in World War II. What I am about to tell you is classified information that has been buried for over 80 years. I only know about it because my grandfather was there. He was a ground crew chief at Ladd Airfield in Fairbanks, Alaska in 1943. He saw the blimp come in. He saw what was inside. Or rather, what wasn't inside. On August 16, 1943, Navy blimp L-8 took off from Treasure Island in San Francisco on a routine coastal patrol. 2 crew members aboard, Lieutenant Ernest Cody and Ensign Charles Adams. Experienced airmen, good men. The mission was simple. Fly north along the California coast, watch for Japanese submarines, radio in every 30 minutes, return by sunset. The blimp never made it back to California. Instead, 72 hours later, it appeared over Ladd Airfield in Fairbanks, Alaska, over 2,000 miles from where it should have been. It descended smoothly, touched down on the runway with textbook precision, and settled onto its landing gear like it had been guided by an expert pilot. But when the ground crew opened the gondola door, there was no one inside. No pilot, no crew, just equipment, supplies, and a logbook with entries that made no sense. My grandfather was one of the first people inside that empty craft, and what he found haunted him for the rest of his life. He made me promise never to tell anyone while he was alive. He died 6 months ago at 98 years old. Now I can finally share the truth. The official story is that L-8 had some kind of mechanical failure over the Pacific, drifted north on air currents, and somehow made it to Alaska before coming down. The crew supposedly bailed out over the ocean and were never recovered. Case closed. Tragic accident. Move on. But that story has always been garbage. Blimps done to fly themselves. They done to navigate 2,000 miles through mountainous terrain. They done to make perfect landings at unfamiliar airfields. And they done to do any of that with the engines still running and the radio still warm from recent use. My grandfather told me what really happened. Told me about the things they found inside that gondola that never made it into any official report. Told me about the recordings they destroyed and the evidence they buried and the orders that came down from Washington to never speak of it again. I spent the last 3 years tracking down everything I could about L8. Found declassified documents. Interviewed families of other crew members who had been at Ladd that day. Pieced together the real story. Last month, I got access to something that confirmed everything my grandfather told me. A reel-to-reel tape recording from the blimp, this radio. Someone had hidden it in the National Archives, misfiled deliberately, buried where no one would think to look. I listened to that tape 50 times. I wish I hadn't listened to it once. I'm going to tell you what is on it. What Lieutenant Cody and Ensign Adams experienced in their final hours. What my grandfather found when he climbed into that empty gondola. But I need you to understand something first. This ISN to a ghost story. This ISN to folklore or urban legend. This happened. It is documented. It is real. And the thing that took those men is still out there. The tape starts normally. Standard radio chatter. Cody reporting their position off the California coast at 1,400 hours. Weather conditions. Visibility. Everything routine. Then, at 1,520 hours, something changes. Cody, his voice becomes uncertain. He reports seeing something in the water. Something large, moving just below the surface, keeping pace with the blimp. At first, he thinks it as a submarine, a Japanese sub shadowing them. But the shape is wrong. Too big, moving too fast, and it's not trying to hide. It is following them deliberately. Cody reports it up the chain. Gets orders to maintain observation. Not to engage, just watch and report. For the next hour, the thing in the water follows them. Cody's reports become more frequent, more agitated. The object is getting closer to the surface. He can see details now. It's not mechanical. It is organic, alive. Something massive with a shape that doesn't make sense. He uses words like segments and appendages and eyes. But nothing fits together into a coherent description. Like his brain is refusing to process what he is seeing. Then, at 1,647 hours, the thing surfaces. Cody's voice on the tape becomes frantic. He is describing something rising from the ocean. Something enormous, taller than the blimp, taller than anything that should be able to support its own weight outside of water. Adams is screaming in the background. Not words, just raw terror. The last transmission is Cody saying they reclimbing, trying to gain altitude. Trying to get away from whatever has come out of the Pacific. Then the radio goes silent. Just dead air. No distress call. No mayday. Just silence. That silence lasts for 16 hours on the tape. Then, at 0842 hours the next morning, the radio crackles back to life. But it's not Cody or Adams. It is something else. Something trying to use their voices. Trying to form words with equipment that wasn't designed for speech. The sounds are wrong, distorted. like someone speaking through layers of static and water. The thing identifies itself as L8, says it is continuing the patrol, says everything is normal, but the voice is flat, emotionless, reading from a script it doesn't understand. In the background, you can hear other sounds, wet sounds, sliding sounds, the creak of metal under stress. The fake transmissions continue for the next 2 days. L-8 checking in at regular intervals, reporting positions that make no sense. Moving north, always north, crossing into Canadian airspace, flying over the Alaskan range, heading toward Fairbanks. Each transmission sounds more wrong than the last. The voice breaking down, degrading, like whatever is using the radio is losing interest in maintaining the illusion. The final transmission comes at 062 hours on August 19th. Just 3 words, repeated over and over in that horrible, distorted voice. Then silence. The tape ends there. My grandfather told me what those 3 words were. He heard them himself on the base radio that morning. They chilled him to his core. Coming down now, coming down now, coming down now. 20 minutes later, L8 appeared over Ladd Airfield. It descended in a perfect glide path, touched down smoothly, and powered down its engines. By the time the ground crew reached it, everything looked normal from the outside. Just a blimp that had somehow made an impossible journey. My grandfather was part of the team that opened the gondola. He told me the smell hit them first. Salt water and something else. Something organic and rotten. The interior was soaked, everything dripping. The instruments covered in a thin film of slime that wasn't quite liquid and wasn't quite solid. The logbook was open on the navigation table. The entries were in Cody's handwriting, neat and precise, but the content made no sense. Coordinates that placed them over the middle of the Pacific Ocean one moment and over the Arctic the next. Altitude readings that fluctuated wildly. Weather observations describing conditions that couldn't possibly exist. The last entry was dated August 19th, 6:15 hours, 5 minutes before the blimp appeared over Fairbanks. It read, "We are not alone. It came with us. It wants to see where we go. It wants to learn." That's when my grandfather noticed the cameras. The blimp carried aerial reconnaissance cameras for photographing submarine positions. The film canisters were still in place. Still loaded. Someone retrieved them and developed the film in the base photo lab. The photographs showed the flight path, the California coast, the open ocean, then something else. Images taken from high altitude showing something in the water below. Something massive. The photos were blurry, hard to interpret, but you could make out a shape. Multiple shapes, actually. Dozens of them, all moving in formation, all heading north. Then the photos from overland, the Canadian wilderness, the Alaskan range. And in every single image, starting from somewhere over British Columbia, there were shadows, dark patches on the ground, moving, following the blimp's path, growing in number as the flight continued. The final photographs were the worst, taken from inside the gondola, pointing down through the observation windows. They showed the interior of the blimp's gas envelope, the massive balloon that kept it aloft. And inside that envelope, clinging to the fabric, were things that shouldn't exist. Segmented bodies, too many limbs, faces that were almost human but stretched and wrong. Dozens of them, packed into the envelope, hitching a ride. My grandfather watched them develop those photos. Watched the base commander, his face go white. Watched as orders came through to destroy everything. Burn the photos, dump the slime, scrub the gondola, drain the gas envelope without looking inside. Get rid of any evidence that L-8's journey had been anything other than an atmospheric anomaly and a tragic loss of crew. They worked for 3 days straight, cleaning, destroying, erasing. By the time they were done, L8 looked normal, just an empty blimp that had made an impossible flight. The official investigation concluded that Cody and Adams had bailed out over the Pacific and drowned. The blimp had drifted on air currents and gotten lucky. End of story. But my grandfather couldn't forget what he'd seen. The slime, the photos, the logbook entry, the things clinging inside the gas envelope. He started researching, found other incidents, other disappearances over the Pacific during the war. Ships that vanished, aircraft that went down, submarines that never returned, all in the same general area. All within 100 miles of where L-8 had its last genuine transmission. He found local legends from coastal tribes, stories about things that lived in the deep trenches off the California coast, things that occasionally came to the surface, things that were curious about the human world. That would take people to study them, to understand them, to learn how to move among them undetected. The war ended. Ladd Airfield was eventually closed. The story of L-8 became a footnote, a curiosity. One of those unsolved mysteries people talk about over drinks. What really happened to those two airmen? Where did they go? How did an unmanned blimp fly itself 2,000 miles? My grandfather kept his promise, never told anyone the full story. But he made sure the tape survived, hid it where it might someday be found, where someone might piece together what happened. He wanted the truth preserved, even if it could never be openly told. I found that tape because he left me clues, breadcrumbs in his personal papers, coordinates, file numbers, names of people who knew. It took me 3 years, but I found it, listened to it, heard those transmissions, that voice trying to be human and failing. The thing that took Cody and Adams came from deep in the Pacific. Something ancient, something that had been down there long before humans ever sailed those waters. It came up during the war because all the activity attracted its attention. The ships, the aircraft, the submarines, so much noise, so much movement. It wanted to understand, wanted to see where these strange metal creatures went. So it took the crew of a slow-moving blimp that came too close to its territory, studied them, learned from them, then used their ship to explore the human world. It rode that blimp all the way to Alaska, brought others of its kind with it, nested in the gas envelope, saw our bases, our cities, our civilization. Then presumably, when it was done, went back to the ocean, back to the deep trenches where we can follow, taking with it everything it learned, everything it needed to know about us. And here, it's what keeps me awake at night. That was 80 years ago. If those things were that curious then, if they were that bold, that willing to venture into our world to study us, what have they been doing since? How many more people have they taken? How much more have they learned? And most terrifying of all, what are they planning to do with that knowledge? Story 9. White Hunter. I watched a man transform into a polar bear during a blizzard, and now it hunts me every time the wind howls. My name is Marcus Chen, and I am an engineer from San Diego who took a 6-month contract in Utqiagvik, Alaska. Most people still call it Barrow. It is the northernmost city in America, perched on the Arctic Ocean where the sun doesn't rise for 65 days straight during winter. I thought the darkness would be the hardest part. I was wrong. I arrived in November, right as the polar night began. The oil company needed someone to maintain their equipment at the research facility on the city's edge. Good pay, isolated work, perfect for someone running from a messy divorce. I figured I'd do my time, bank the money, and leave before the endless dark drove me crazy. The locals warned me about the polar bear man on my second day. The facility manager, an Inupiat woman named Sarah, told me the story while showing me around. She said that during the worst blizzards, something walked the streets of Utqiagvik. Something that looked like a man from a distance but moved like a predator. Something that left tracks too large to be human but too deliberate to be animal. Sarah said her grandfather had seen it in 1973 during a storm that lasted 4 days. He was checking his hunting equipment when he saw a figure approaching through the whiteout conditions. Tall, hunched, moving against wind that was knocking over fuel drums. As it got closer, he realized its proportions were wrong. Arms too long, shoulders too wide, head too large and angular. The figure stopped 20 feet away. Her grandfather said he could see it clearly despite the blowing snow. It had human features, eyes, nose, mouth, but they were stretched, distorted, and covering its body was white fur. Not clothing, actual fur, growing from skin that was somewhere between pale human flesh and the tough hide of a polar bear. It watched him for maybe 30 seconds. Then it dropped to all fours and vanished into the storm, moving faster than anything that size should move. Her grandfather found tracks the next morning. They started as boot prints, then gradually transformed, the toes elongating, the heel changing shape, until they became the distinctive tracks of a massive polar bear. I laughed when Sarah told me this, called it a good campfire story. She didn't laugh back. She just said that every winter, someone sees it, and every winter, that someone ends up either dead or changed. She wouldn't explain what change meant. I should have listened. The first month was fine. Long darkness, brutal cold, but manageable. I fell into a routine. Work during the facility, its operational hours. Sleep during the rest period. Avoid thinking about anything beyond the next day. The isolation was actually peaceful. No phones ringing with lawyers. No reminder of failure. Then December 18th happened. The Weather Service issued a blizzard warning. Not unusual, but this one was predicted to be severe. Wind speeds over 70 miles per hour. Visibility 0. Whiteout conditions lasting potentially 3 days. The facility manager sent everyone home early. told us to hunker down and wait it out. I lived in company housing, a small apartment in a triplex on the city's north edge. Closest neighbor was 50 yards away. The storm hit around 8 p.m. I lived through California earthquakes and summer heat waves, but I did never experience anything like an Arctic blizzard. The wind didn't howl. It screamed, a constant shriek that vibrated through the walls. Snow didn't fall. It flew horizontally, creating a solid white wall outside every window. I made dinner, watched a downloaded movie, tried to sleep. Around midnight, I heard something over the wind. A rhythmic thumping, slow and deliberate, coming from outside. I looked out the window but saw only white. The thumping continued, growing closer. I convinced myself it was loose equipment. A trash can rolling around. Something normal. Then I saw the handprint on my window, pressed against the glass from outside. Large. Too large. Fingers spread wide. But wrong. The proportions were off. The fingers too thick. The palm too broad. And it was leaving condensation on the glass, which meant whatever made it was warm-blooded. Was breathing. I backed away from the window. The handprint slid down the glass. Slowly, like whatever was out there was testing the surface. Looking for entry, I grabbed my phone. No signal. The storm was blocking everything. I was completely isolated. The thumping moved to my door. 3 heavy impacts. Then silence. I waited. 5 minutes. 10. Nothing. I crept to the door. Looked through the peephole. Saw white. Just endless white. I convinced myself I was being paranoid. That the handprint was ice buildup. That the thumping was wind-thrown debris. I went back to bed. Lay there listening to the storm. Started to drift off. Then I heard scratching. On the roof. Long, scraping sounds. Like claws on metal, moving back and forth. Searching. I sat up. The scratching stopped. The apartment was silent except for the wind. My bedroom window exploded inward. Not shattered. Exploded. Like something had punched through it. Snow and glass sprayed across the room. And reaching through the opening was an arm. White-furred. Muscular. Ending in a hand that was halfway between human and bear. The fingers were tipped with black claws. Each one 4 inches long. The arm swept back and forth. Searching. I pressed against the far wall. The hand caught my blanket. Pulled it through the window. Then withdrew. I heard movement outside. Heavy breathing. Then nothing. Just wind and snow pouring through the broken window. I ran to the bathroom. Smallest room. No windows. Locked the door. Pulled out my phone. Still no signal. I was trapped in a bathroom while something circled my apartment. Something that could punch through windows and tear away blankets. Something that was hunting me. I stayed there for 6 hours. The storm raged. The thing outside never left. I could hear it moving through the apartment, knocking over furniture, tearing through closets, searching methodically, but it never tried the bathroom door, like it was saving that for last, like it wanted me to know it was coming. Around dawn, the sound stopped. The storm was still raging, but the apartment went quiet. I waited another hour, then carefully opened the bathroom door. The apartment was destroyed, furniture overturned, drawers emptied, my clothes shredded, but the thing was gone. I found tracks, starting at the broken window, moving through every room, large bare tracks, but in the kitchen, they changed. They became boot prints, human boot prints, size 13 or 14. The tracks led to my front door, which was standing open. Snow had drifted inside, and on the wall beside the door, written in what looked like frost, was a message. I know you're sent now. I reported everything to the facility, to the police. They came, took photos, found the tracks, but the official explanation was a polar bear. They wander into town sometimes, looking for food. The broken window and destroyed apartment were consistent with a curious bear. The boot prints were mine. From checking the apartment after the bear left, the message was ice formation. Random, meaningless. But Sarah pulled me aside, asked if I saw it. Really saw it. I described the arm, the hand, the way it moved with purpose. She nodded, said I was marked now, said the polar bear man chooses people, usually outsiders, usually people running from something. It sees into them, sees their guilt, their shame, and it feeds on that. Becomes stronger. She said her grandfather had been running too. From mistakes he made, from people he hurt. The polar bear man hunted him for 3 winters. Every blizzard, it would appear, get closer each time, until finally, during the worst storm of 1976, it took him. They found his body a week later, frozen, but his face was gone, torn away, like something had wanted to remove his identity, his humanity. I should have left then, should have broken my contract and fled south, but the company wouldn't let me leave during winter. No flights out except for emergencies, and they didn't, to consider a possible bear encounter an emergency. I was stuck until March. 4 more months of darkness. 4 more months of storms. It came back during every blizzard after that. December 23rd, January 4th, January 19th. Each time, I would hear it, see evidence of its presence. Tracks circling my building, scratches on my door, and each time, it got bolder, got closer. On February 2nd, I saw it clearly. I was walking from work to my apartment during a moderate storm. Visibility was maybe 20 feet. I saw a figure ahead, walking toward me. I assumed it was another resident. But as we got closer, I realized it was too tall, too wide. It walked upright, but its gait was wrong. Its arms swung too far. Its head turned at angles that shouldn't be possible. We were 10 feet apart when it stopped. I could see its face. It looked human, weathered, bearded, maybe 50 years old, but the eyes were black. Completely black. No whites, no iris, just solid black orbs that reflected no light. And its mouth was too wide, stretching almost ear to ear, filled with teeth that were too sharp. Too many. It smiled at me. Then its body began to change. The shoulders broadened, the arms lengthened, the face pushed forward into a muzzle. White fur rippled across its skin. In 10 seconds, it transformed from something almost human into something that was definitely not. A polar bear standing upright, 9 feet tall, massive, but with those same black eyes, those same too many teeth. It dropped to all fours, growled, a sound that vibrated through my chest. Then it charged. I ran, sprinted through the storm, couldn't see where I was going, just running blind. I could hear it behind me. Heavy footfalls, getting closer. I ducked between buildings, changed direction randomly, finally dove through an open door, slammed it shut, found myself in someone's house. A family staring at me in shock. I tried to explain, tried to tell them about the thing chasing me. But when we looked outside, there was nothing. Just empty street, and a single line of tracks in the snow. My tracks, running in circles. No bear, no monster, nothing. The family let me call the facility. Sarah came to get me. She didn't say anything during the drive, just looked at me in the rearview mirror. Her expression was sad, like she was looking at a dead man. Back at my apartment, she finally spoke. She said the polar bear man was getting ready, that it had fed on my fear long enough, that the next storm would be the last. It would come for me completely, would take not just my life but my identity, would consume everything I was and add it to itself. She said that this is what it did. Collected people, their guilt, their shame, their secrets, wore them like layers, each victim making it stronger. She said there was one way to survive, to confront what I was running from, to face my guilt, to let it go. Only then would the polar bear man lose interest. Find someone else, someone carrying heavier burdens. I spent the next week thinking about my divorce, about the affair I had, about the lies I told, about the family I destroyed because I was selfish and weak. I called my ex-wife, apologized, really apologized, took responsibility, didn't to make excuses. She hung up on me, but I felt lighter, less burdened. The next storm came on February 17th. I heard the familiar sounds, the thumping, the scratching, but this time I opened my door, stepped outside, let the blizzard hit me. And there it was, the polar bear man, standing in the street, watching, waiting. I walked toward it, stopped 10 feet away, told it I wasn't running anymore, told it I accepted what I had done, that I did carry my guilt honestly, that it couldn't have me. The thing tilted its head, studied me with those black eyes. Then slowly, it began to shrink. The fur receded, the body collapsed inward, until standing before me was just a man, native, old, wearing traditional furs. He looked sad, tired. He nodded once, then turned and walked into the storm. I never saw him again. I finished my contract, left Alaska in March, came back to California, rebuilt my life, but I still think about that thing, about how many people it must be hunting, about how many carry burdens heavy enough to feed it, about how many will face it and fail, will run instead of confront, will become part of it. Another layer of guilt and shame walking the streets of Utqiagvik during blizzards, searching for the next person trying to hide from themselves in the darkness. Story 10. Ice tunnel screams of Whittier. The screaming started 3 levels down, where the ice on the tunnel walls was thick enough to preserve sounds from 1945. My name is Carl Fisher, and I am a structural engineer from Portland. Last November, I took a contract job in Whittier, Alaska, assessing the stability of the old World War II tunnel system beneath the town. It was supposed to be a straightforward gig, 2 weeks of measurements, structural analysis, and recommendations. Easy money before the holidays. I should have asked why they were offering triple my normal rate. Whittier is one of the strangest towns in America. Almost the entire population lives in a single building, Baggage Towers, a 14-story Cold War relic that used to be an army barracks. The town gets over 20 feet of snow annually and is accessible only through a tunnel that closes at night. It feels like the end of the world up there. Isolated, forgotten, perfect for secrets. During World War II, the military built Whittier as a secret port. They carved massive tunnels into the mountainside, creating a hidden network of passages, storage facilities, and living quarters. After the war ended, they abandoned most of it, sealed off sections, left others to slowly freeze and decay. Nobody goes down there anymore. Nobody except idiots like me who get paid enough to ignore common sense. The project manager, a retired Army Corps engineer named Walter Sims, met me at the tunnel entrance on my first day. He was in his 70s, weathered and quiet. He handed me maps that looked hand-drawn, marked with sections labeled unsafe and do not enter. When I asked why those areas were off limits, he just said the ice made them unstable. That some tunnels had collapsed decades ago and were too dangerous to explore. But I noticed something odd about those marked sections. They were all at level 3 or below, the deepest parts of the system, the areas that had been carved furthest into the mountain. And on every map, someone had written the same warning in faded red ink. Listen first. I started with the upper levels. Standard military construction from the 40s. Concrete walls, metal doors, everything built to last and slowly failing anyway. Water damage, rust, the gradual surrender to time and weather. I documented everything, took measurements, noted structural weaknesses, professional work, nothing unusual. The temperature dropped as I went deeper. By level 2, I could see my breath. By level 3, ice covered every surface. Thick, translucent ice that had accumulated over 70 years. It coated the walls like glass, hung from the ceiling in frozen curtains, made every step treacherous. Level 3 was where the map started showing those block sections. Collapsed tunnels, sealed chambers, areas marked with that strange warning. I followed the main corridor, my headlamp cutting through darkness that felt somehow heavier than normal darkness. Denser, more resistant to light. That's when I heard the first scream. Distant, echoing, coming from somewhere deep in the tunnels ahead of me. A man's voice. Terrified, calling for help. The sound bounced off the ice-covered walls, distorting, making it impossible to tell exactly where it originated. I froze, called out. My voice echoed back to me, but the screaming didn't. He stopped. It continued for maybe 10 seconds, then cut off abruptly. The silence that followed felt wrong, too complete, like the tunnels were holding their breath. I checked my radio. Dead. No signal. I was too deep. Too much rock and ice between me and the surface. I should have gone back right then. Should have climbed to a level where my radio worked and reported what I heard. Instead, I convinced myself it was acoustic weirdness. Sound traveling through the tunnels from the town above. Maybe maintenance work. Maybe something falling. Not screaming. Definitely not screaming. I continued deeper. The tunnel branched. I took the left fork, following my map toward a section marked for assessment. The ice grew thicker. In places, it completely blocked the passage, forcing me to crawl through narrow gaps between frozen walls. The temperature was well below zero. My breath crystallized instantly. My equipment beeped warnings about battery drain and extreme cold. 20 minutes in, I found the first body. It was preserved in the ice, frozen into the wall like an insect in amber. A man in a 1940s military uniform. Eyes open, mouth open, face locked in an expression of absolute terror. His hands were raised, palms pressed against the ice from the inside, like he'd been trying to push his way out. I staggered backward, hit the opposite wall. My headlamp beam swept across the tunnel, and I saw them. Dozens of bodies, all frozen in the ice, all in the same uniform, all with the same expression. Some were standing, some were on their knees, some appeared to be running. All of them looked like they had been trying to escape something. This wasn't in any report, wasn't on any map. Nobody had mentioned finding bodies in these tunnels. I grabbed my camera with shaking hands, started documenting everything. That's when the screaming started again. Closer this time, much closer, multiple voices, overlapping, coming from deeper in the tunnel system, coming from where these frozen men had been running from. I ran, dropped my measurement equipment, kept only my light and camera, scrambled back through the narrow passages. The screaming followed me, not echoing now, moving, pursuing, getting closer. I could hear individual voices, hear words, They were calling names, shouting orders, begging for help. I burst out of the narrow section into a wider tunnel, spun around, shined my light back the way I'd become. Nothing, just ice and darkness and my own panic breathing. The screaming had stopped, but now I heard something else. Footsteps. Many footsteps. The sound of boots on ice. Marching, coming toward me. I ran again, took a wrong turn, found myself in a section not on my map. A natural cavern that the military had partially excavated. The walls here weren't concrete. They were ice, ancient glacial ice, clear enough to see into. And there were things in that ice. Shapes, bodies, but not human, not quite. Too tall, too angular, limbs that bent wrong, faces that almost looked human but weren't. The footsteps were getting closer. The marching was louder, rhythmic, purposeful. I could hear breathing now. Ragged breathing, gasping, like lungs that had been frozen for 70 years were suddenly trying to work again. I found another tunnel, followed it blindly. The ice walls here had marks on them. Scratches, like fingernails, like someone had been trying to claw through frozen walls. The scratches formed patterns, words, carved desperately into the ice. Over and over, the same phrase repeated hundreds of times. They woke up. I came to a junction. 3 tunnels branching off into darkness. I chose the middle one. It sloped upward. That had to mean something. Had to lead toward the surface. The footsteps behind me grew louder. Closer. I could hear voices now. Actual words. Men calling to each other. Using names. Using ranks. Speaking like they were still on duty. Still following orders from 1945. The tunnel opened into a large chamber. My headlamp revealed equipment. Generators. Radio gear. All from the 40s. And in the center of the room, a table. Papers scattered across it. Logs. Reports. I grabbed one. The handwriting was shaky, desperate. The last entry was dated February 3, 1945. It described an excavation. The military had been digging deeper into the mountain, creating storage for munitions. They'd broken through into a natural ice cavern. Found something in the ice. Something that had been frozen there for thousands of years. Maybe longer. The report said they'd tried to extract it. Thaw it. Study it. It had been a mistake. The moment the ice began to melt, the thing had started affecting people. Making them see things, hear things, making them violent, paranoid. The base commander had ordered an evacuation, sealed the lower levels, left a crew behind to finish the sealing work. That crew had never made it out. The last entry said they could hear the sealed doors being opened from the inside. Could hear footsteps in the tunnels. Could hear their dead coming back. Then the writing stopped mid-sentence. The marching footsteps entered the chamber. I spun around, shined my light, saw them. Men in World War II uniforms. Dozens of them. Their skin was blue-white. Frost covered their faces. Their eyes reflected my light like animal eyes. They moved in formation. Perfect military precision. But they were wrong. Their movements were too stiff. Too mechanical. Like puppets. Like something else was controlling them. They didn't acknowledge me. Just marched past. Heading deeper into the tunnel system. Heading toward the sealed sections. Toward whatever had been frozen in that cavern. Whatever they accidentally released in 1945. Whatever was still down here. Still waking up. Still calling its frozen soldiers back. I waited until they passed. Then I ran. Climbed. Found a tunnel heading up. Clawed my way through collapsed sections. Squeezed through gaps barely wide enough for my body. My hands were numb. My face was numb. But I kept climbing. Kept moving toward the surface. I emerged 3 hours later. Stumbled into the main access tunnel. Triggered a security alarm. The project manager found me. I tried to tell him what I'd seen. The bodies in the ice. The marching soldiers. The reports in that chamber. He just looked at me with this sad, tired expression. Like he heard this story before. He told me I experienced oxygen deprivation. Hallucinations from the thin air at depth combined with extreme cold. Told me to rest. Told me I'd feel better after some sleep. But I saw the way he looked at the tunnel entrance. Saw the fear in his eyes. He knew. Everyone who worked on this project knew. They paid me for 2 full weeks even though I refused to go back down. Put me on a plane to Anchorage the next morning. Made me sign paperwork, NDAs, liability waivers, documents that basically said if I talked about what I'd seen, I'd lose everything. But I kept the photographs. Uploaded them to a secure drive before they could confiscate my camera. Images of the bodies in the ice. The scratch warnings on the walls. The last reports from 1945. I looked at them 100 times, trying to convince myself they were not real, that I imagined everything, that it was just oxygen deprivation and fear and cold. Except the photographs done to lie. The bodies are there. The warnings are there. And in 3 of the images, in the background, barely visible in the shadows, you can see them. The figures standing in the darkness. Watching, waiting, the frozen soldiers of Whittier. Still marching, still following orders from something that should have stayed buried in the ice. Still guarding whatever was in that cavern. Whatever the military who accidentally woke up in 1945 and couldn't be put back to sleep. The tunnels are still there, still accessible. The town still sits above them. People still live in Whittier, go about their daily lives, never knowing what is beneath their feet. Never hearing the screams that echo through those frozen passages. Never seeing the soldiers who march through the darkness. Never wondering what they were marching toward, or what happens when they finally reach it. I haven't slept well since November. Every night, I hear it. That distant screaming, those marching footsteps, the ragged breathing of frozen lungs trying to work. I know it's just memory, just trauma, just my brain processing what I experienced. But sometimes, late at night, when the wind howls and the house creaks, I wonder if it is something else. If maybe I brought something back from those tunnels. Some echo, some connection to whatever waits in the ice beneath Whittier. Still waking, still calling, still gathering its frozen army for something that is coming. Something that started in 1945 and hasn't finished yet. And that's the last echo for tonight. The wilderness closes back over our footprints, but the stories linger like breath in frozen air. Make sure you're subscribed and notifications are on, so you'll know when we return to the dark. In the comments, tell us where you're listening from or share a strange story of your own. Midnight Whispers is more than a voice. It's a gathering place. Until next time, stay wary of the woods and what waits beyond the light.